Welcome back to Monster in My Closet, the podcast where we shine a light on the professional world's darker corners. I'm Anil Saxena, joined by my co-host, the founder of Medusas, Morgan Hunter. Each episode, we tackle the fears and faux pas that haunt our work lives, with insights, interviews, and a dash of humor, some stupid analogies, and probably swearing. So if you've ever felt like you're navigating a workplace labyrinth, a never-ending approval process, an evil hall of mirrors, or a constantly ending quarter, you're in the right place. Let's confront those monsters together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Monster in My Closet. So Morgan, this week, are we scared or scary?
Scary. Very scary.
We are scary. Yes. Yeah. And we're going to uncover why we're so scary in this episode that we're calling the mad science of victim blaming. So in today's episode, we're going to unravel the spine-tingling stories of those who dared to speak out only to be cast as villains in their own horror stories. Discover how organizations can become a dark abyss where the cries of the blameless echo unheard through the empty hallways. But fear not. We're also going to shed light on powerful rituals and protective measures that can banish this nightmare once and for all. Learn how to recognize the signs, fortify your defenses, and create safe haven where the true monsters are held accountable. So 3 big things we want to talk about today. First, we want to understand a little bit about victim blaming. Its definition, historical context, societal norms, etc., organizational culture and victim blaming. So how does the culture and leadership contribute to or mitigate victim blaming? And then third, the role of HR, human resources, and management. So how do HR departments sometimes perpetuate victim blaming and the best practices to prevent victim blaming? So, Morgan, what kind of led us to have this conversation about victim blaming?
Yeah, so a lovely former coworker of mine posted an article on LinkedIn. It was a Harvard Business Review article that was covering a research paper that was released recently about how often when someone comes forward to talk about harassment or bullying, that they are blamed for being unreasonable or being rude, for tattling or making stuff up about someone. And the circumstances where they saw this most frequently were when the harasser was of high influence or high value to the organization, or was a friend of the person that was receiving the report. And if you think about it, that makes sense. You know, he's my buddy. We've been hanging out, and now you're like coming in trying to stir some shit up about my buddy. No way. That's not happening. Go sit in a corner, little girl. So I found this really, really interesting because it did kind of fit with my experience of the world. I'm like, yes, someone actually said that out loud. Finally. Yay. But there's a lot of other like really interesting research around this topic. And like why it happens and the psychology of it, etc. So that's why I wanted to dive in and do this episode, because there's a lot to unpack here and it's not easy to correct.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it is such a common thing that happens in organizations. And it's not even something that is kind of high on the radar. I don't know how a radar works, but it's not showing up on the radar all the time, however the fuck the radar works. But what are the common signs that victim blaming is occurring in a workplace? What have you seen?
I think it is honestly the moment that a person makes a complaint, the words that come out of the person's mouth that is receiving the complaint, right? So if I were to go to my boss or HR and say, I have a problem with this individual, and they say, well, what did you do to cause that to happen? Okay, that's it right there. That That is your clearest sign. And and you're laughing, but it still happens. Like even when I've made complaints, about folks, they're like, "Well, what did you do?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What did I do?" Well, you must have done something else. They wouldn't have reacted that way. I'm like, I I feel like this isn't going as I planned. This little meeting.
Yeah, and I'm laughing because not that it's not a serious situation. It's mostly because I'm a child, but I think I'm also laughing because it it feels like it's such a like I said, it is such a common thing, and it makes me think about like as a sibling or a cousin, like when they break something and you say something and they're like, well, what did you do? That must be your fault that happened. It's kind of it's at times it's a knee jerk reaction, and I think one of the other pitfalls to me is that when people know that somebody is doing an action that's against a company's policy, but nobody ever calls them out or reports them on it because they know nothing's going to happen about it. I mean, I've worked in organizations where there's a person who is just horrible to others, but nobody says anything about it because they know that there's going to be retaliation. And
Mhm.
so you learn how to mitigate that or work around it or things like that, which is really a very caustic way. It's a hard way to work. It actually takes more time and makes you less effective and efficient in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, aside from kind of the physical things that can happen to you when you're under that amount of stress as a victim, you are absolutely right. It's super expensive for a company to have employees working like that because I know when I've been in situations like that, I was in pure survival mode. Like all I could think about is how I was going to survive the next meeting with this person in it, and how I was going to protect myself like mentally, and navigate through that. And then there was like overflow after that meeting where I had to like woosa and like try to like calm down enough to go like do actual work. And um yeah, it's very, very costly for companies. So one of the things that I read in my research, because I was trying to figure out why we're like this, is this thing called the just world hypothesis. So in this just world hypothesis, people are prone to think that the world is just and fair, right? That's kind
Yeah.
of the default. And when things fall outside of this, the world is just and fair framework, we don't like that. Cognitively, we're like, nope, nope. So if you come to me and say this person of high esteem is harassing me, you're going to be like, that no, that's not possible because the world is fair and just, and that just wouldn't happen. So it must be, which is ironic because that's neither fair nor just when that happens. But it's fascinating, and there's a couple other ones. There's this thing called everyday sadism, and I'll put this in the show notes. But it's this phenomenon where you just kind of enjoy seeing other people get hurt, like like the videos where people are tripping and falling and getting hurt, and you kind of derive delight from that. So there's this kind of like low level of sadism that exists within people,
Yeah.
that can bring these types of behaviors to the forefront, kind of like the Schadenfreude,
Yeah.
and it's just, which is my favorite, and I do participate. I'm
Yes.
not gonna
Well, I mean, I think there's a whole the America's Funniest Home Videos. Like, it's been 30 years of videos of guys getting hit in the crotch and people falling down the stairs and breaking their face, and we're all
lie.
like, ha ha ha! Look at that person. They
The
fell down, or
Darwin,
that.
oh my God, the Darwin.
Yeah, yeah, and so I think that there is that level of kind of underlying everyday sadism. I don't know. I don't know why that makes me laugh. It feels like there's a T-shirt there somewhere in the
We should make
works.
that up.
And but I think that this notion of a kind of a just world, it permeates
Mhm.
everything, right? In how decisions are made and how promotions are made, and in how people are hired. And it's almost like when you realize that that is not the case, it begins to have you question everything that's going on around you. And so when organizations don't uphold the values that they set out, that they propose, that they put on their annual report and on all the posters in the hallway, it begins to create cracks in the organization and actually starts to allow for more of that kind of activity to happen when you're not curtailing it early and
That's
often.
right. That's absolutely right. Because you know you're not going to get caught.
Right. That's, I mean, I think it happens very, very frequently. And I would imagine our listeners can think of instances where it was like, well, one thing happened and then it was just a little bit of a domino effect that other things just started to happen because nobody was watching.
It's interesting too when you think about if you see an aberrant behavior, you kind of want to think, well, that was an anomaly. That doesn't, like what I saw can't possibly be how that person rolls on the daily,
Yeah.
right? So I'm just gonna put that over here
Right.
and pretend it never happened. And I think that's really dangerous. And same with like the employee surveys where they get outliers, where someone has spent time to say, this is a really bad toxic situation for me and something needs to be done about it. And they're like, well, that's an outlier. That can't be true.
Right.
Okay, so the assertion is someone spent all that time to create an elaborate lie about someone.
This must be a conspiracy theory.
All the time they dismiss the outliers instead of taking them seriously and going, what's going on here? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And poking a little bit to just kind of see, is there validity in that rather than, like you're saying, just sort of put it aside into the everyday statism bucket.
And you don't do your research by asking the person who's supposed to be the perpetrator whether they did it or not.
Right.
Do you harass people? No. No.
Right. Or maybe they're just like, yeah, but they were asking for it. Sure, I did. But, look at them. They're just asking to be harassed. It's sort of like when you get you have the sexual harassment training. And I always think, why do they call it sexual harassment training? Are they teaching you how to harass people? That's not the right title for this training. So, how can organizations create a culture that supports victims rather than blames them? What did you kind of find in your research and experience?
This one was tough because I've honestly never seen it done right. So I did have to do extra research to kind of go, okay, so how can I actually give some solid advice here? And I did find some information that about having third-party oversight, complaints, employee surveys, etc., so that there's like a non-biased third party who can really say, no, you can't, that's not an outlier because I see this other thing in this other organization, in this company, separate organization, but it's the same kind of thing, and you might have an underlying systemic problem. So whistleblower programs are okay, but I feel like because you can be anonymous, which you should be able to, but it's tough to follow up on if you're anonymous. You'd have to have an overwhelming number of people have with the same complaint for them to like kind of take action on it. I love the idea of board level oversight and having the board look at certain data that hasn't been cleaned, like looking at the raw data. And holding leaders accountable, right? So like you said, if someone's being a jerk, they need to like get right in there and say that we're not going to tolerate that kind of behavior even from you, SVP, right? That's just not upholding our corporate values, knock it off. And then empowering bystanders to speak up and report harassment and giving them a very clear, frictionless way to do that. Because reporting harassment can be hard. and scary, even if it's not you, even if you're just a witness of it, because you're always thinking, oh, they're going to retaliate or they're going to find out and I'm going to be going through all this drama, which I don't need. But you have to have a clear, safe path for
Yeah,
employees to report.
that's those are great kind of methods, and I agree with you that it is exceptionally hard for employers to do this really well because there's just lots of it's fraught with kind of pitfalls and issues. And I also feel like there is this tendency for people to gloss over issues because we always want to paint this sort of rosy picture of like everything's great here. I mean, look, we're number one on Glassdoor. Everybody loves us. Or we're number one in the Great Place to Work top 100 places to work list. But the reality is that even in the very best organizations, there there are pockets of people
Yeah.
that are shitty. That is,
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like in America with the police force, right? The vast majority, 99% of police are awesome people, and then you've got 1% or less than 1% that may not be, and you got to deal with those people. And I think that it is important for us to recognize as leaders that it is our duty to make sure that we are rooting out when this kind of thing occurs, when harassment or bullying or just shitty behavior happens. We have to call it out and make sure that we're saying that, hey, that's not okay for you to do that or operate that way or act that way.
I think there's an important nuance here that I've run into in the past. So you have protected classes, and if the law is very clear that you cannot harass people based on your gender, sex, blah blah blah, blah. The list is long as it should be, but it doesn't cover general bullying. And there's no federal law about that. I think other countries do have workplace bullying type of legislation, but just pure bullying, just because I'm a jerk to everybody, it generally isn't covered legally in a company's harassment policies. And my argument is all bullying should not be tolerated. And then it's like extra sentencing if it's of a protected class. Like you start with the kind of the general container, and then you can get more specific. Harassment is harassment is harassment, and that tending to walk some weird legal line because it's a protected class versus not a protected class, that's bullshit.
I agree with you, and I think it's such an important distinction because when you let it happen to people that aren't quote unquote in a protected class, it still creates those cracks, right? And I hear sometimes from folks that I have to be careful about what I say because I don't want to be construed as a fill in the blank. And it's like, yeah, you should be careful about what you say. And if what you're about to say you think is going to be taken in the wrong way, don't fucking say it. Like, that is a good rule to live by. If I'm going to say something that could be misconstrued as racist or misogynistic or mean or anything like that, reconsider. Like, just don't speak the words that you were going to speak and think about how to say that thing differently. That's
or not at all.
Yeah, sometimes that's right. Sometimes don't say shit, right? Like shut up more. That's what my wife always tells me is shut up more, right? I mean,
So I have a question about
yeah.
as leaders, what is our responsibility? So if someone comes to us to say something, let's talk about that. What are the options we have as leaders to support people that are coming to us with information?
I think to me there's three big things, right? So the first is to listen, right? And listen all the way through. And don't interrupt. Don't try to be the detective. Don't do any of that. Just listen. And then the second thing is to apologize that it happened. And that's not to say, like, I'm sorry that that happened on my watch kind of thing. It's more to just, right? It's more to say, hey, I'm sorry that that happened to you. That sucks. It is recognizing and acknowledging that that person had that experience and it was real to them. And then I think the third thing is that you then need to go take some action. So, whether that is going to your human resources department or whoever is responsible for that, or doing research on your own, or what have you. And then the last, I know they said there were three things. Here's 3B. Here's a bonus step. Circle back with that person that brought you that concern, right?
Mm-hmm.
And make sure that they understand that the action that you've taken, what you've learned, what the next steps are, all that kind of stuff. So I think it is incumbent upon us as leaders to make sure that we're doing those things so that people feel like, hey, I was heard. That person listened and is going to take some action to help to mitigate or rectify this situation.
Yeah, I love the advice of just listening and don't say anything, because I'm going to guarantee you most people are going to say the wrong thing. So just don't. When people have come to me in the past, when they're done giving me their accounts, I usually ask them, how would you like to handle this? So, are you telling me because you just want me to know? Do you want to report it to HR? Would you like me to report it to HR? How would you like to move forward with this? And if they say, and this gets tricky, if they say, I'm just telling you, I don't want you to do anything with it, then I have to have the conversations like, well, as a manager, I can't not do anything about it. So I still need to inform HR so it can be on the record, but, and just be honest with them, because you can't just bury it. You do have to do something with it. So that can be a challenge for the victims in this scenario, but it's kind of the reality of the situation.
Agreed. And I think that that's a really important thing to make sure that they understand what's going to happen with that situation. Mm-hmm. But the reason that I really like that notion of just listening first is I remember I've had instances where I've gone to tell a boss something and they've said, well, I'm going to have to report this to HR, like almost immediately. And it's like, well, now I don't know if I want to tell you because I don't know what they're going to do with that information.
Yeah. I also like to offer up whatever resources might be available. This is a good time to remind your employee we have a lovely employee assistance plan. If you need support counseling, whatever resources might be available through the company. And, if it's true that, everything's moving forward and it's going to get reported to HR, I think I would ask the person to start kind of making some notes, because HR is going to ask, right? They're going to say, like, when did this happen? They're going to want the details. So if you can clear some room to kind of do a little bit of documentation, this would be a good time to do that because they're going to ask for it.
Yeah, they are. And they're doing their due diligence, right? Mm-hmm. So what about when the victim of workplace bullying finds themselves when there's no checks and balances in place? What can an individual do to kind of protect themselves or deal with it when they don't have that support system?
Update their resume. I'm just. I mean, there's really, if you're in a shit situation and you don't have support, you can either say, I'm going to choose to do this. Like I'm going to figure that out, and I'm going to create a big buffer around me, and it is just what it is, or start looking elsewhere. Yeah. I saw some stuff about, you can talk to a friend. I mean, you can, and you can talk to friends. You can talk to your counselor or psychologist or whatever. You can absolutely do that. But talking doesn't make the trauma go away if you're still actively in the trauma every day, right? Yeah. So my personal advice is always try to find yourself an exit. if there's no way to fix it institutionally, that you need to find an exit for your own self and your physical health.
I think that's a good reality check, right? I mean, I think you can document what's going on. You can find advocates externally. Like those are things that you
Or
can
a lawyer.
certainly do.
I mean, you can do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, I think that those are all healthy things to do. But part of the reality of life is that not every workplace is awesome. And not every workplace is for every person. And it's okay to leave an organization if that organization is toxic for you. As a matter of fact, it's not just okay, it is. I mean, I think this has the Morgan and Anil stamp of approval. If you are in this, get the fuck out of there. Like, do not subject yourself to that kind of thing. There are thousands of workplaces. Vote with your feet and leave. And make sure that other people know that that is not a great place to work. Because in organizations, there is a tendency, like we said, to try to gloss over issues and concerns. And I will say that in my current workplace and in your former workplace, I really find it very refreshing that our senior leaders will will call out when there are issues, when there are concerns, when things are happening that they may not be doing well. And I actually think that's really, really healthy because that's part of being a human being. That's part of the human condition. So, cool. Any last words here about the victim blaming?
Well, don't participate in everyday sadism. I mean, just don't be part of the problem.
Right?
And don't ask people what they did to deserve that.
Right. So the three things, right? Don't participate in everyday sadism. Don't ask people what they did to the harassment that they got. And then I think the third thing is that, as a leader, it's really your responsibility to take care of your people. So make sure that you're doing that, right? In the best way that you know how, and take care of yourself too. Right, everybody. Thank you very much for listening to another episode in Monster in My Closet, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
As we wrap up another episode here at Monster in My Closet, we want to thank you, our fearless listeners, for joining us on this journey of exploring what scares us or when we're scary. Professionally, of course. Together, we've ventured deep into the workplace wilderness armed with humor, insights, and a touch of irreverence, and hopefully learned something together along the way. But our journey doesn't end here. Monster in My Closet is proud to be part of Medusas.org. Medusas is a membership-driven, non-profit organization serving underrepresented groups, minorities, and individuals with disabilities who are doing business in the software-as-a-service space. We're a community created by SaaS professionals, for SaaS professionals, and even the SaaS curious. Visit Medusas.org to discover how you can contribute to a movement that empowers professionals to face their workplace monsters head-on. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your colleagues, and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us shine a light on the monsters lurking in the professional closet, making our community braver, stronger, and a little bit wiser. Until next time, keep challenging the status quo, embrace the journey, and remember, no monster is too big when we face it together. Cheers.